obviously our transportation budget is one of the ones that will be the trickiest going forward, because you have a huge fall off in the amount we have been being funded from Washington that we just don't know what will happen yet, and we won't know for several months. So the good news for Tennessee is, because we don't have road debt and because we've been responsibly managed for years and years, as the Commissioner said before any of us got here, we're in a much better situation to make certain that we can do basic road maintenance and safety and address safety issues. That being said, it's a very difficult time for the department, obviously, because they don't know what will happen next year, and because we don't give them any money out of the general fund budget. It all comes from road taxes and then from other money from Washington. This situation's more out of our hands than any other department's budget. So with that, I will stop and take questions. We'll still just start with DOT questions, then we'll do anything else anybody has.
Governor, even without the federal issue, there's been the issue of pressures on the state's road fund,
right,
because of the improving mileage,
right,
and other reasons. Is that something you're looking to address before the next term, or is this a second-term issue for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a state, if you look at the overwhelming majority of our funds have come from Washington, and I think for ourselves, I think we'll wait and see how Washington solves their part of the issue first before we make any decision about anything else to do. Long term, obviously, funding roads on a per mile driven basis is a pretty tricky proposition, both in terms of the federal dollars and the state dollars that come to us.
But it doesn't appear that the federal government's in any rush to address that. And
I think that's probably fair. Which the scary, I mean, like I said, as I said, I'm one of those in favor of the federal government's only starting to spend what they bring in. The problem with government by sequestration is there's no thoughtfulness or no strategy put into it. It's just a blunt cut without a decision about, okay, where are we going to make the across-the-board cuts in a thoughtful, long-term perspective that can help, that can really serve the country in the best way. So, unfortunately, we're doing government the worst way now that I think you can.
When the time comes for you to look at it, do you anticipate the traditional raising of the fuel tax, or some new means for raising?
We haven't come close to getting there, so we really haven't even had those discussions yet.
do you think this is something that you would take up in a second term?
You have to get a second term first.
Right, but someone's
we really,
again,
I think a lot of it depends on, we have a bigger issue right now in terms of how we've traditionally funded roads, both with state dollars and federal dollars, until we get some better sense of how do they solve the Washington piece of the equation. I think it's just too early to say what we're going to do out of Tennessee.
But the state's funding of roads has been an issue before this came up, and it will remain. So, why don't you deal with something you can control as opposed to something you can't?
Well, I think you can. I mean, that's obviously one approach, but at this point in time, again, if we're going to really address the situation in ways that mean more than just maintaining existing roads, I think it's going to take more than the state's piece of that to do that. So I think until you know what's going to happen out there, I think it'd be preliminary to do anything else.
How do you think all this bodes for funding for the AMP, and whether it's next year or in the near future?
Well, I think as you heard the Commissioner said, we have and no new news to anybody, we have $8 billion worth of backlog of projects that we already have commitments to. Those aren't just things, that's why I was asking about, those are things we bought right away to, and environmental approvals, et cetera. And so, again, the AMP is going to have to compete with a lot of other very necessary projects across the state to get funding.